The 1956 Suez Crisis is remembered as a turning point in the history of international relations in the 20th century because it marked a turning point in which major powers from around the world fought for control of a crucial waterway. Spreading over political moving, military clash, and the rise of new international arrangements, the emergency epitomizes subjects of decolonization, cold conflict contentions, and the moving elements of force in the Center East. The background course of events, international reactions, and long-term effects of the Suez Crisis will all be examined in this in-depth investigation, along with their broader implications for regional stability and global politics. The Suez Emergency, emitted in the late spring of 1956, set off by Egypt's choice to nationalize the Suez Trench, an essential conduit for worldwide oceanic exchange connecting Europe and Asia. This strong move by Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser tested the interests of previous pilgrim powers, principally England and France, who had authentic stakes in the waterway and its tasks. The emergency immediately swelled into a tactical showdown including Egypt and the pilgrim powers as well as Israel, which saw a valuable chance to address security worries in the district. The subsequent conflict diplomacy and eventual international intervention revealed the complexities of geopolitics following World War II. The influence of Cold War dynamics, and the emergence of new global power centers. In order to comprehend the significance of the Suez Crisis, it is essential to investigate both the history of the canal as a whole and the broader context of Egyptian nationalism and independence movements in the years following World War II. Under the direction of French engineer Ferdinand de Lesseps, the Suez Canal was completed in 1869, demonstrating European engineering prowess and imperial ambitions. It decisively diminished the movement time among Europe and Asia, turning into a key part of worldwide exchange and key significance. Nonetheless, the channel's possession and activity were quarrelsome issues all along. Initially constrained by the French and English, who were significant investors in the Suez Waterway Organization, Egypt's power over the channel stayed restricted in spite of ostensible freedom from English provincial rule in 1922. The 1936 Anglo-Egyptian Treaty, which gave Britain some rights and a military presence in Egypt, kept Egyptians, including military officers like Gamal Abdel Nasser, feeling nationalist. A turning point occurred when Nasser took power in Egypt in 1952 through a military coup. Arab nationalism, anti-colonialism, and a commitment to modernizing Egypt's military and economy were hallmarks of his regime. The Suez Canal, which he saw as a symbol of Egyptian sovereignty and economic independence, was central to his vision of nationalization. Nasser announced the Suez Canal Company's nationalization on July 26, 1956, assuming control of the canal's operations and assets. The nationalization of the Suez Canal elicited swift and vehement responses from France and Britain, who perceived it as a direct threat to their economic interests and strategic influence in the region. Nasser's action was seen as an affront to their colonial-era privileges and a challenge to Western dominance in global maritime trade by both nations, which had significant financial stakes in the Suez Canal Company. Britain under Prime Minister Anthony Eden and France under Prime Minister Guy Mollet began looking into options for a joint military intervention to oust Nasser's regime and regain control of the canal in response to the nationalization decree. Israel, in the meantime, had its own inspirations for military activity against Egypt. Since its foundation in 1948, Israel had confronted aggression from its Bedouin neighbors including Egypt, which had upheld Palestinian Fedayeen assaults from Gaza and the Sinai Promontory. Secret exchanges between England, France, and Israel finished in the Convention of Sèvres in October 1956, illustrating an arrangement for Israeli powers to attack the Sinai landmass under the guise of tending to security dangers presented by Egyptian upheld Fedayeen. Under the guise of separating the warring parties and protecting the Suez Canal from potential blockades and hostilities, British and French military intervention was to follow this invasion. On October 29, 1956, Israeli powers sent off an unexpected intrusion of the Sinai Promontory, quickly progressing towards the Suez Waterway. The Egyptian military, not entirely settled to safeguard its domain, drew in Israeli powers in wild fights across the Sinai. On November 5, 1956, British and French forces launched Operation Musketeer, which included a naval blockade of the canal and airstrikes against Egyptian positions. The conflict quickly grew from there. The tactical mission, at first described by English and French prevalence in air and maritime capacities, confronted worldwide judgment and strategic difficulties. The U.S. under President Dwight D. Eisenhower and the Soviet Association, drove by head Nikita Khrushchev, quickly reprimanded the intrusion as an infringement of Egyptian sway and a danger to provincial strength. The two superpowers expected that the Suez emergency could grow into a more extensive center-eastern conflict, possibly hauling them into head-to-head a showdown or fueling cold conflict pressures. The Suez Canal's destabilization of global trade routes and the possibility of a larger conflict prompted the international community to mobilize diplomatic efforts to resolve the crisis. With the support of non-aligned nations and developing nations, the United Nations Security Council mediated between the conflicting parties and advocated for a ceasefire. On November 6, 1956, Israel, Britain, France and the United States of America, the Soviet Union and other members of the international community exerted a lot of pressure on them to agree to a ceasefire. The British and French forces agreed to cease all military operations and withdraw from Egyptian territory during the ceasefire, which marked a turning point in the Suez Crisis. The Suez emergency sped up the course of decolonization across Africa and Asia, as previous pioneer powers like England and France confronted expanding tensions to give up majestic possessions and award freedom to their settlements. The crisis brought to light the growing tide of nationalism and anti-colonial sentiment in the decades following World War II, particularly in Africa and the Middle East. The Suez emergency uncovered divisions inside the Western coalition and stressed relations between the U.S. and its European partners. President Eisenhower's steadfast resistance to the old English-French-Israeli mediation reflected more extensive strains over cool conflict systems and needs. The emergency additionally featured the developing impact of uncommitted countries and the creating scene in forming worldwide tact and security drives. In the fallout of the Suez emergency, Egypt arose as a central member in Bedouin governmental issues and a main voice in the uncommitted development. Nasser's height as a hero of Middle Easterner patriotism and hostile to colonialism was set, impacting local collusions and clashes for quite a long time into the future. The emergency additionally flagged the decay of customary provincial powers like England and France in the Center East, making ready for expanded Soviet impact and new arrangements. In worldwide international relations, the United Nations' capacity as a forum for international cooperation and conflict resolution was put to the ultimate test by the Suez Crisis. Following the ceasefire, peacekeeping forces were sent to the Sinai Peninsula, marking a turning point in the organization's efforts to stop more fighting and keep the peace in conflict areas. The Suez Crisis brought to light the Suez Canals and other global trade routes' susceptibility to military conflicts and geopolitical tensions. In the decades that followed, maritime powers and international organizations made efforts to protect international shipping lanes and guarantee freedom of navigation a priority. All in all, the Suez emergency of 1956 remaining parts a vital crossroads in present-day history, epitomizing the intricacies of decolonization, cold conflict competitions, and the mission for public sway in the Center East. The crisis changed how people around the world saw power, diplomacy, and international law. It also had a lasting impact on how regional stability, economic globalization, and international institutions changed. By looking at the causes, course of occasions, worldwide responses, and long-haul outcomes of the Suez emergency, we gain experiences into the interconnected idea of worldwide legislative issues and the getting through difficulties of keeping up with harmony and security in a quickly impacting world request.